questions as possible. We'll be reacting to news as it breaks. If you guys already have the Fantasy Life app, you'll be getting the news from us first. So we'll be reacting to everything there. We'll also be answering as many questions as possible. We're going to hit it off from the start with Byron talking about Joe Mixon and what that means for the Bengals. Let's go. Byron, what do you think? Joe Mixon's out.
Yasin, both you and I ran to our waiver wires right before we published this broadcast to both pick up Gio Bernard. We've already seen that he's clearly the backup in Cincinnati. He's a high efficiency yield backup. He's a guy that the coaching staff really trusts. We saw Gio Bernard actually getting a fair amount of activity early in the season to make us feel good about him as a Joe Mixon handcuff this year. Actually, there was a point where folks were a little afraid he was cutting into Joe Mixon's workload early in the season. That certainly has alleviated as Joe Mixon picked up massive volume. He's a top 3 running back in the league in terms of his touches per game. And we saw the biggest news with Joe Mixon in recent weeks was the uptick in the targets in the passing game. And Bernard is a guy who can really excel there. So I think if you get Gio Bernard in this week, whether you're a Mixon owner or not, he's probably a solid RB2 play that's going to get, I would anticipate, at least 20 touches. He's going to get a lot of potential work in the passing game. And if you take a look at this one, Yasin, it's Cincinnati at home against the Cleveland Browns. It's a 50-point projected game total on the sports books. It's kind of a middling matchup for the fantasy running back, but we saw what James Conner did in this one last week, and this is a spot you're going to feel very good about Gio in. So this is if you're not a Mixon owner, this is huge news. If you can slide him into your flex this week, or you had some other issue you're trying to backfill in terms of buys or injuries, and if you're a Mixon owner, like this is top priority, and he needs to be rostered probably the rest of the way if you're a Mixon owner.
Yeah, so does this sound like, it sounds like you have concerns about Mixon and his health potentially enough that Gio is a legitimate hold backup handcuff, essentially. Is that right?
Well, I think we talk very often and frequently, and this was kind of highlighted when Dalvin went down recently. We've talked all the times about the Chase Edmonds and the Tony Pollards and the Benny Snells and, the Latavius Murrays. In this case, it was Boston Scott, this week on Thursday night. And I think it's easy to forget about Gio Bernard. You and I have both owned Joe Mixon this year, and he's a guy like you try to roster, but you don't necessarily always keep him. You'll drop him if you need to. And I'm not sure how wise that is at this point. Mixon hasn't, he's been a little banged up, in the preseason and now. So this is the kind of insurance you're going to need to carry. And I think if this should raise enough pain for Joe Mixon owners that they never let Gio Bernard off their roster again rest of the season.
And if you don't roster Joe Mixon, then Gio is still a nice hold, correct?
Yeah, at this point, you got to see what happens. Like I said, I think he's an RB2 this week. I'd feel very, very good about starting him. And, the schedule's actually kind of eased up as we've gotten more data on the opponents on the season for the Bengals. So if there's any prolonged absence from Mixon, I think you've still got a pretty useful player in Gio Bernard. This is one of those rare guys. Okay,
let's answer some questions about Gio that are coming in on the chat on YouTube and Facebook. So, question in PPR. This person, we're gonna answer this in a little bit. I'm gonna go to a Mixon question. They want to know who they should bench in PPR: Gio, Latavius Murray, or Josh Jacobs. Now, remember, guys, Josh Jacobs' offensive line, the entire line is in COVID protocol, so it's expected that none of them will be starting. So I definitely want to talk about the Raiders in general, but if it comes down to benching one of these players, are you benching Gio, Latavius Murray, or Josh Jacobs?
I would bench Latavius Murray with the information that we have at this moment. If something goes totally awry with the Las Vegas Raiders, we can reconsider it. But Josh Jacobs and Gio Bernard are two solid starts this week.
Okay, so let's talk about this touchdown-only league. Gio over Juju or OBJ, or are we sticking with OBJ and Juju? Again, touchdown-only league.
I'd go Gio. He's got the best chance to score of any of those guys.
I would agree with that. Is this person starting Gio over David Johnson in PPR?
I would. David Johnson's been good. He's a guy we've been recommending the last month. The schedule's eased up. The Texans' offense is starting to catch a little bit of fire. And Johnson has been a really good plug-and-play guy. He's kind of gotten by as an RB2. We haven't really seen the upside with David Johnson, though, and I think that's something that you could get out of Gio, especially PPR in the passing game this week.
Okay, to that point, though, David Johnson, we still really like David Johnson this week in PPR. This is just a question of Gio over David Johnson, because I'm slotting in David Johnson in almost every league that I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, he's been great, and he's been a guy we've been all over the last month when other people have kind of been hands off, and it hasn't been amazing, but he's been very, very serviceable, and I would definitely project that same thing for David Johnson this week. If you could play them both, that even better, right? I don't know what the other flex options are on this gentleman.
Yeah, it always depends on roster makeup. Guys, as we're answering these questions, remember, there is a range of possibilities that can happen in fantasy. That's true of fantasy football, fantasy basketball, DFS, any of this stuff. It's a range of possibilities. So remember, if we're saying that you should be starting Gio over David Johnson, that doesn't mean that we think in 100% of scenarios Gio will outperform. What that means is that we think in the majority of scenarios, let's call it in 60% of scenarios, 60 out of 100 times, Gio will outperform David Johnson. That does also mean that David Johnson this week in 40 out of 100 scenarios will outperform Gio. So when you're making these decisions, when it comes to emotional decision making, you want to start the player that you're going to feel less upset about if it ends up being the wrong call. So make those decisions, but understand we're talking about a variation of possibilities here. Let's move over to Jeffrey's question: Gio versus Swift or Gibson this week. Who are we sitting out of them? I have an opinion here. I'd like to know what you think.
I like all of those options. I'd probably sit Gibson if I had the choice to sit just one of those three. And if I'm only starting one guy, it's probably Gio.
Okay.
All good options, but Gio is probably your safest bet for volume this week.
Got it. News just came in from the Fantasy Life app that head coach Bruce Arians says that Leonard Fournette is good to go for the game. I want to talk about that in a second because more people are going to be funneling in. So start thinking about that answer as we answer some more questions that are coming in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it makes it very easy to talk about Ronald Jones, a guy that was one of my potential sell high targets on my weekly trade cast over at rosterwatch.com this week. Yasin, for now, Ronald Jones looks like the real deal. Certainly you're happy if you didn't sell him last week when we discussed it. That's when we thought Fournette was going to kind of re-enter the picture. And you have to wonder at this point, only another week on the bench for Fournette, if Ronald Jones is kind of pulled away and started, at least for the time being, put Fournette in the rearview mirror. I believe that stands to reason based on everything I saw at training camp, Bucs training camp this summer, and everything that we've seen so far this season. The way this is tracking, 4.9 yards per carry on the season, Ronald Jones is absolutely uncanny. Of all the notable fantasy running backs across the entire landscape of our leagues, Ronald Jones performing right at the top. I mean, he's a great in between the tackles runner, which is really where Fournette does his damage. Fournette doesn't offer a lot outside of that. He's been injured. I don't think they want to put Brady at any unnecessary risk. Now, Ronald Jones, he hasn't been a huge threat to score. We've seen it. We finally saw it last week, and he's not real efficient in the passing game. So he is a player who is not really that efficient from a fantasy production perspective with the touches he gets at 19 touches per game. It's been a boon for Ronald Jones. He's been an RB2, but you do worry if that volume erodes at all, that he could potentially take a big hit. So like the way that I see it is Ronald Jones is a fine play for now and the foreseeable future. The Bucs don't have a bye until week 13. I think you need to be cognizant of the idea that Leonard Fournette is looming, and keep your options open with Ronald Jones. If you're in win now mode, he's a great guy to roll out this week, Yasin. If you want to trade him to somebody else in your league who is currently in win now mode to try to pick off one of their better players because maybe you're in the catbird seat, maybe you want to pick off Dalvin Cook on a bye or something from a struggling team this week, I do believe you can use him as that type of piece. But I have really no expectations for Leonard Fournette in the short-term future, I think he could certainly surprise us. It may also mean if you're a Ronald Jones owner, it might be a good time to make sure that you roster Leonard Fournette.
So here's a quick question. So that game is against the Las Vegas Raiders. They are down basically their entire starting O-line. You have Leonard Fournette, who's now healthy. Rojo, who's been doing pretty well the past few games, though he's not a fantastic fantasy star usually. But can we talk a little bit about game script? Are you guys projecting with your Rosterwatch tools any type of game script that's going to allow Tampa Bay to just run the ball a lot more frequently than maybe relying on the pass? Because my personal thought is the Raiders are going to have a hard time keeping up with an O-line that's on the entire, the entire O-line is on the COVID list at the moment. If they're not playing, I expect Vegas to try to air it out more, but I expect Tampa Bay to stay ahead. What do you think is going to happen? And more importantly, how does this affect the players on Tampa Bay? And then we'll eventually get to Vegas.
Well, the Bucs are 4-point favorites. I'm a little bit surprised with the information coming in that it's not more. I'll be interested to see if that spread goes and where the sharp money is on this one. I think the Raiders, they surprised people against Kansas City a couple weeks ago. And so, I think they could play Tampa Bay a little bit tougher than you might expect under these conditions. Yasin, maybe that explains why we've only got the Bucs as 4-point favorites, because I'm with you. It seems like they should be bigger favorites. I can easily imagine a similar game script to what happened last week against the Green Bay Packers, which kind of left Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, owners wanting for more, but certainly catered to Ronald Jones continuing his big volume there. So, I think that if you have to guess, I would say it does favor the Tampa Bay running back in terms of like the key skill players. This is a good spot for Ronald Jones. I think that becomes more evident the more we learn about the injury. It's not just the offensive line for the Raiders either. I think it's their safety. Abrams is out. So it's another good spot for Ronald Jones, man.
Yeah. Okay. And that's a Sunday night game. So you're going to want to keep any player that you have in Tampa Bay, if possible, in your flex slot, so that you don't waste somebody so that you can still swap them out just in case something changes. We did see last week that Leonard Fournette at last second was ruled out. So to prep for that, always remember you utilize your flex spot because it is the most versatile position on your roster. And you can always swap somebody out with a running back or a wide receiver or a tight end. You don't want to put up a donut for no reason.
And by the way, they were available in a lot of leagues this week. The Bucs defense already was a good, decent play on the week, but probably a good play on the rest of the season. So they were one of the few defenses out there you could have maybe picked up this week to start to alleviate any headaches you have with streaming a defense. But certainly with these developments, it only enhances the perceived value of that Bucs defense. I'd be very excited to start them in season long this week, Yasin.
Cool. All right, let's go. Brian has a question about PPR. They need one wide receiver, one running back, one flex out of all these. We have Godwin, Fuller, Jackson, and Gio. I think I'm sitting Jackson, but I actually defer to you on this. What's your thought here?
I would sit Jackson too. And I mean, he could outperform these other guys, but the way I look at it is in PPR, you're going to want to start. Godwin is the favored guy for Brady. I know if the game script goes like last week, like we said, maybe it's not going to be the best situation. He's too good in that offense to sit Godwin. You'll beat yourself up if you miss a good Godwin game. Fuller projected in that. He's got one of the best fantasy profiles of all wide receivers across fantasy football at this moment, Yasin. He's got an unbelievable profile. 5 out of 6 games, he's gone for substantial scores in half-point PPR. There's no way I'm sitting him in this, which is a potential shootout. And then to me, the decision is Gio versus Jackson. And in my opinion, Gio has a clearer path to volume. And in PPR, probably has more upside.
I agree completely with everything that you said. All right, so let's talk about another question that we have. Cooper Kupp, Deontay Johnson at flex this week, half PPR. I think we're going Kupp. I'd like to know your thoughts.
Well, I'm going to check the rankings on that one. I think it'll probably be Kupp just because we really don't know what to expect out of Deontay Johnson at this point, and he's been a little bit injured, but I think this is a little bit closer. So we've got Cooper Kupp as our number 29 receiver on the week, and Deontay Johnson is 36. So we'll roll with Cooper Kupp. It's a kind of a tough matchup against that Bears defense, but I think the slot is where you can do a little bit of damage. And Kupp's been quiet for a couple weeks, so I think it's pretty safe to project a bounce back there.
I actually think for anybody who is looking for decent wide receiver value, I think Kupp is a buy low candidate at the moment. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He's somebody I've talked about a few times this season on the trade market. And, if you can get him low, like he might not have the high end wide receiver 2 upside you hoped for when you drafted him or when your opponents drafted him. But like he's a rock solid, flex or wide receiver 3. And if you can pick him up for that price tag right now, I totally agree with you, Yasin.
Cool. All right, guys. Again, it's Yasin from the Fantasy Life app, and this is Byron from Rosterwatch, rosterwatch.com. We're very lucky to have Byron. Byron goes to the training camps for a lot of these teams. They are respected in the industry for the level of their insight that they bring to the table. And we're answering questions as they come in. We're also reacting live to the news as it happens. As you guys know, on the Fantasy Life app, we push out news as soon as it breaks, if it's relevant to fantasy, sports betting, DFS, things like that. So let's move over to another question, because, again, we had that big Joe Mixon news break that he's not playing. So we have a lot of people asking about Gio. Are we starting Gio over James Robinson or Connor? I'm not smart enough to answer this question. I'll give you an idea with my gut, and then I'll pass it to you, Byron. I think we're not starting him over either of those players. What's your thought?
Well, let's look at the matchup. So, instantly my thought is definitely we're going to play Connor. He's been good, and it's the number 8 matchup of the week. And what should be a good game script against a team like Tennessee, a 50-point projected game total there. James Robinson is a guy I'm a little bit worried about. Not necessarily. Actually, I am worried about James Robinson this week. So let's talk about Robinson, because he's a guy that we were bullish on, obviously, from the beginning of the season, but really this last month, when he got a hot start, a lot of folks were saying trade James Robinson. So we said, no. He's got a good schedule coming up for the next 4 weeks. Write him out at this point. And so what we've seen with Robinson in the last 2 weeks is the volume erode, and he has stopped getting into the end zone. And he's a good player, but I don't think any of this is surprising given the fact that he's an undrafted rookie free agent. And these guys sometimes begin to run out of juice a little bit over the course of the season. We know that Devine Azigbo is getting close to return, the guy who was originally supposed to replace Fournette. So I think there's a more of a platoonish aspect that we're going to begin to see here with James Robinson. So when we're kind of diagnosing his value moving forward, but the other thing that I would say is it's the worst matchup in the league this week, Yasin, for fantasy running backs for James Robinson. So in that situation, like, I think it's only Friday. If I could still trade James Robinson before his game this week, because he's also got a bye in week 8. It's like he's got a bad matchup this week. His volume's eroding. He's got a bye next week, and he's potentially got Devine Azigbo re-entering the picture. To me, this is a good time to move on from James Robinson. As far as it pertains to playing him this particular week, I'm going to go with Gio, man. Why am I going to force James Robinson, who's been a low-volume guy in recent weeks, into the worst matchup on the slate when I have Gio, who's probably going to be, receive quite a bit of volume, including in the passing game.
Okay. Hey, look, I'm not going to argue with that. I was going based on gut. I knew we were starting Connor, but so it sounds like 2 things we're getting out of this: start Gio, start Connor, sell James Robinson now, because his value is going to sustain for this week, and that value might start going down because of the tough matchup this week, but also next week with the following week with the bye. So it's a good time to cash in on James Robinson and see what value you get there. Let's move on to the next question. So, Kevin, hopefully that answered your question. Big Tiny, would you start Kirk over Kupp based on matchup? I think this is a really good question, because any other week I would, for the most part, say no. But with these matchups, are we starting Kirk over Kupp?
And I love Christian Kirk right now. I do. I've loved him for the last few weeks, and the bottom line fantasy production's really picked up. Still worried about his volume. But to me, he's the second best wide receiver on that team, and it's an explosive offense. And I think they're starting to utilize him as the second best wide receiver on the team. So I'd like to see a little bit more volume, but I think you're right, Yasin. Those matchups are polar opposites. It's the number one matchup in all of fantasy for fantasy wide receivers at home for the Arizona Cardinals. It's a 56-point projected game total, which is
Jamal Adams, by the way, not expected to play.
Yeah, the second highest on the slate. So, you know what? I think in this case, I would go with Christian Kirk over Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Okay. By the way, Deshaun Jackson, because of that ankle injury, will be out an extended period. Sorry to anybody that picked him up or rostered him currently. Let's move further down. Let's take outlook on Sony Michel. Can I kick this one off? Sony Michel, I just don't think the Patriots' backfield is sexy in any sort of way. That's my entire take. That's it. It's not sexy in any way.
What do they call him? What do they call him now, Yasin? I think they're calling him Panasonic.
Is that right?
Instead of Sony, yeah. Over there in New England. And I mean, here's the deal, man. I mean, I know we were getting excited about Damian Harris, who I think is still the guy I would want to stash just on the off chance that can become a fruitful situation. But look, it's 54% snap count last week for James White, 21% snap count for Damian Harris, 32% snap count for Rex Burkhead. James White led the backfield with 12 touches. It was Burkhead with 5 touches. Damian Harris was 7 touches. If you run that back to week 4 before their bye, it was a similar split between those running backs. So it's just going to be impossible to pinpoint. First of all, Sony Michel he's lost probably 2 steps since he's gotten to the NFL.
Yeah.
And I was at Patriots training camp last year, and all the insiders I know there, they said, they told me Damian Harris is going to be inactive on Sundays, even though he was having a great rookie training camp. But they said, the bottom line is Sony Michel has a chronic knee injury. It's never going to improve. And that's just something that's going to affect him for the rest of his career. So how can you get excited about Sony Michel? That's kind of a shell of himself in what's going to be an impossible backfield to pinpoint who's going to get the touches or the snap counts in a particular week. And with Cam Newton biting into goal line touchdowns, and Cam Newton even in a horrible week last week, still 65 yards rushing. So I think it's a problem. I'm not really interested in anybody there.
Patriots backfield. I'm ready to move on from everybody in that backfield, drop into waivers, see if anybody's willing to trade. They're not sexy to me.
It's kind of like a dead weight at the bottom of your roster, right? You're carrying these guys. It's handcuffing you. You're not able to make moves to pick up potentially guys who could be better contributors or more marketable players.
You're not going to start these guys. You have them there just in case somebody emerges. That's not a backfield where there is going to be a lead back emerging. You always have random games where Rex Burkhead goes off, and then all of a sudden you're back to square one. By the way, James White, he is back in practice today, so his status for this week is pointing towards he will be playing on Sunday. So, again, to answer this question, from my perspective, I'm avoiding New England's backfield in general. I just think it's a mess. It's not sexy at all or appealing. We answered this question earlier, Bernard or David Johnson. I think the conclusion was majority of scenarios, we both see Bernard outperforming David Johnson in PPR, but they are both, I think they both have a chance of outperforming the other in a meaningful way. So I like both of them this week, but it looks like Bernard might be the better play in the majority of scenarios here.
He might be able to make some bigger plays, Yasin, than David Johnson.
Yeah.
Could be the difference.
Let's talk Swift or Justin Jackson at flex. I'm not happy with those flex options, to be honest. What are you thinking?
Pretty difficult not to start DeAndre Swift after what we saw last week. And certainly you hope this means that he is on the fast track to taking the lead job there, the electric rookie out of Georgia there with the Lions. Still obviously it's unclear, and the Lions have a history of kind of screwing us in terms of their transparency with what they're going to do with the running backs. And look, this gentleman's asking because it's the Los Angeles Chargers at home against Jacksonville. It's the number 3 matchup of the week for Justin Jackson. If we run this thing back to week 5 before the bye with the Chargers. Let me look at the snap counts, touches, and targets tool over at Rosterwatch really quick, and let's see what that exact split was. People were very excited about Justin Jackson after week 5. It was 59% snap count, 20 touches for Justin Jackson, and a great matchup. And then we have, right behind him, right behind him here, we've got DeAndre Swift, 55-point projected game total. Another pretty good matchup. Let's take a look at his snap count last week, Yasin, just so we can get a grip on that. I think it was 17 touches. Let's see here. It was DeAndre Swift, 17 touches, 123 yards, 2 touchdowns, 38% snap count. All right, I think Justin Jackson's the safe play, but I wouldn't blame anybody for getting Swift in a situation on that fast track. Look, this is a homecoming for Swift, coming back to Georgia to play on that fast track there. So I think Justin Jackson, the safe play, probably is what I'd go with, Yasin, but I have no qualm starting Swift this week.
Okay. So let's take a look. I think news is coming out officially that Austin Hooper has been ruled out for Sunday. So Browns tight end Austin Hooper has been ruled out for Sunday with an illness, by the way, non-COVID. So non-COVID illness, Austin Hooper ruled out for Sunday. So just wanted to let everybody know. Francisco has a question. Are we dropping James White for Gio?
If I needed to play right now, or if I was a Mixon owner, I absolutely would.
I'm going to go rapid fire. So I'm going to keep asking because we have a lot to catch up on. Bernard or OBJ at the flex in full PPR?
Bernard. And by the way, for Austin Hooper folks, David Njoku re-entered the picture last week for the Cleveland Browns at a 40% snap count. So if you're in a total bind because of Hooper, that might be a sneaky guy to look at.
Okay. Let's take a look at Darrell Henderson, James White, or Gio PPR.
I'd go with Gio. Darrell Henderson not involved in the passing game, 13 touches a game. McVay played a shell game with us in the red zone and at the goal line last week. He's been good, but difficult to trust.
By the way, Austin Hooper, he's going to have an appendectomy. He has appendicitis, which is incredibly painful. So he's been ruled out for Sunday and will have surgery today. He will not be put on IR.
Yeah, so I think that if you're in a total bind, you could look at David Njoku. Logan Thomas got in the end zone last week. I don't know how much you can trust, that one. Eric Ebron's been a bit of a disappointment. He's got a decent matchup this week. Certainly if Gronk is somehow still out there on your wire, I think that's a good guy to look at. But I think a lot of people who own Hooper might be forced to play Njoku this week, Yasin.
Yeah. Better rest of season stash, Gio or Freeman in PPR?
Probably Gio on the off chance that Mixon is got a prolonged injury here. I mean, Freeman is not a valuable player in fantasy, and his workload totally evaporated last night. There's just very little upside there with Freeman.
Agreed. All right, we have Jose with a question. This person has Keenan, Allen Robinson, Scary Terry. Would this person start David Johnson over any of these three? They didn't identify if it's PPR. Let's assume it is PPR.
Yeah, I'd probably start him over Allen Robinson. It's a tough matchup for Allen Robinson this week against, let's see here. It's going to be potentially against Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah.
Which is, for Allen Robinson is the kind of player that Jalen Ramsey can have. Those are long, physical guys, and that's the type of player Jalen Ramsey can deal with a little bit easier. So I would be when you've got a great option like David Johnson, why start Allen Robinson in a really tough situation?
Yeah, I agree with that. All right. So this person's having a hard time deciding on tight end. Are we going Fant, Tanyan, or Gronk in PPR?
Well, I'm going to give you our rankings right now. So we have it as Tanyan.
There you go, Corey. Out of those three, we're going Tanya. Tabitha has a question. Connor, Hunt, Mike Davis, Gio, Rojo, I always want to say Rojo, or Singletary. Who do I play? I'm assuming we're only choosing one.
Yeah, so this is pretty much between Rojo. I mean, gosh, I don't know. I'm Mike. So let me look at I'm just going to go with the rankings here. We got Connor, Hunt, Mike Davis. Let's see who we've got highest there.
I mean, for me, it's Connor.
I've got Connor once. We've got Kareem Hunt as our number 6 back of the week at Cincinnati, the number 8 matchup of the week, a 50-point game total. I mean, look, we've got Kareem Hunt at 6, Connor at 8, and Mike Davis at 9, Jones at 13. Like, these are incredible options, but Kareem Hunt is highest in our rankings.
So, but if we were to go in order, Hunt first, Connor second, Davis third, it sounds like, are your top 3 out of those options, right?
Yep. With Rojo right behind. That's a hell of a team, man.
Yeah. All right. So we got Kelly or Bernard, PPR. I'm going Bernard. What are you going?
Yeah, I will second that.
Okay. All right. Tabitha, by the way, that was Tabitha's question with Connor, Hunt, Mike Davis. That was a standard league. That does not change my opinion because I went Connor first, but does that bump Connor over Hunt for you?
I don't think so. It makes it closer, but we're going to go with Kareem Hunt. He's a sick player that's about to get some volume in a good matchup.
Okay. Let's go pick 2 out of 3 for PPR. Cup, Gio, Higgins, Justin Jackson, or Gibson. Starting Gio, I'm probably going Cup.
Wow. T. Higgins really emerging as the number 1 wide receiver there in Cincinnati. Let me see what we've got on his ranking right now. I think he's a guy we need to be paying close attention to. So T. Higgins, we have as our number 20 ranked wide receiver of the week. It's a number 2 matchup of the week against Cleveland at home. And like the thing with Higgins is he's emerged in terms of snap counts and target share, but he's doing the most with those targets at this point too. So if I like Gio, I like Higgins. And then I think the other guy you're considering is Justin Jackson. So would we start Justin Jackson?
So it's 2 of 3. They need 2 of 3, which I don't understand because they gave us 5 options. So, so let's make this. I think at the top you have Gio over Higgins and flex. Is that right?
I'd have Gio, and then my next 2 guys are Higgins and Justin Jackson. I would make that decision from there.
Okay. I think this is T.I., TJ, Frank, Drake, McKinnon, Justin Jackson. I'm assuming we're picking one.
Drake, McKinnon, and Justin Jackson.
And let's assume PPR.
So we got Drake at number 17. That's going to be over Justin Jackson, and it's going to be slightly over McKinnon. So we'll go with Kenyon Drake. It's a little bit of a difficult matchup, but at home, I think in the big game total, you find a way to attach yourself to this Cardinals offense.
Cool. Better play this week. Danny has a question. McLaurin or Crowder in PPR since Darnold is coming back, which I don't think makes too much of a difference.
I mean, you know that Jamison Crowder is leading the league in 11.5 targets per game. And that's going to be pretty difficult to argue with. Let's see what the matchup is here for the New York Jets. Oh, gosh, it's going to be a middling matchup. Oh, it sounds like Tre'Davious White missed practice today.
Let me take a look.
That's going to be something to pay attention to. And then I know everybody's really banking on a kind of a Terry McLaurin resurgence right here. It's the number 3 matchup of the week at home. Dude, I'd go with Terry McLaurin.
Okay. Let's take a look. From People Scare Me has a question. Half PPR. They need 3. Gio, Drake, AJ Brown, McLaurin, Robbie Anderson. Unfortunately, this person has Michael Thomas, so that's what's making the decision difficult.
All right, so we need 3. We know we're doing
going with the first 3, but I'd like to know your thoughts.
So I think we've got it down to Gio and then probably AJ Brown. It's actually a sneaky good matchup. AJ Brown, 50-point game total. Basically an even game. It's a pick'em game script here. Top 5 matchup of the week. So we're going to go Gio, AJ Brown, and then in PPR, man, or half point PPR, I'm going to go McLaurin over Drake. I'd go Gio, AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin.
Okay. Just remember, guys, yesterday AJ Brown was not spotted at practice. So just keep an eye on the official report that comes out today.
Easy pivot to Drake if that happens for this player.
All right, cool. Let's move on to this question. This person needs two. Cup, Gio, or Deontay Johnson. Who are we sitting?
Well, we had the Cup versus Deontay Johnson argument or discussion earlier, and I actually think that's super close, just given the matchup for Cup. But I at this point, we just don't know enough about Deontay, especially in the post-Chase Claypool breakout. I think we go with Cup and Gio Bernard here.
All right, so we're sitting Deontay Johnson.
Yep.
Pick 2, McKinnon, Justin Jackson, or Drake?
Well, we've got Drake and Justin Jackson ranked the highest, and I like McKinnon, but I think there's always the possibility of Shanahan screwing you with the running back situation. There's a lot of hype about Jermichael Hasty, possibly even Jeff Wilson vulturing a touchdown this week. So McKinnon was awesome before Mostert came back. I like him if you have to play him, but probably hard to get in over Jackson and Drake at this point.
Okay. Next question from Aladdin. Do I play Gio with Mixon out or Lamb or Drake?
I would play Gio. I like Gio more than any of those guys.
Okay. Harmony, by the way, seems to agree with you. Well, agree with me at least. You do sit Deontay on his first day back in a lot of scenarios. This is a broader question. I'd like to answer this. Who are some players you think are buy low candidates? We will be identifying who we think are buy low candidates as we have this conversation. Byron and I typically just shoot from the hip in terms of people that we are aiming for, that we think have high potential down the line, that people might be down on emotionally. So we will continue to address buy low candidates. But do you have anybody off the top of your head?
I got a whole list of them, Yasin. Let me just fire away here. Clearly, Zeke Elliott is, I don't know if he's a buy low, but he's available right now, which is news for him. You're not going to rip anybody off for Zeke Elliott, but
man, Gucci doesn't go on sale. You ever buy Gucci on sale? Zeke is Gucci.
If I'm a winning team with the stacked roster, I'm absolutely going after Dalvin Cook on a bye this week. If his owner is struggling, I think you could do a lesser deal for Jonathan Taylor in a bye week. Got to remember these bye weeks can create kind of an artificial purchasing moment on some of these players. If I'm a winning team, I'm absolutely going after Miles Sanders, out 1 to 3 weeks with the minor knee injury. He was 80% snap count, 20 touches per game, a PPR maven and what's a burgeoning Eagles offense. You love Miles Sanders if you can get your hands on him. Clearly, Christian McCaffrey, this is the time. Like, this is going to be your last chance. He's out another week. If you've got the assets to pull it off, like, that's a season winner. The Panthers are in better shape than folks thought they would be with McCaffrey nearing return. You've seen what Mike Davis has done. Like, if I'm a one-loss team or no more than 2 losses and I've got a stacked roster, I'm going to see what move I have to make to try to bring Christian McCaffrey home this week. I don't think we're there on Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler yet, Yasin. Both those guys are still a month out. Now, that could mean you could get a major discount on them at this point if there's a struggling team that just can't see any end in sight. With those two, I think you'd have to be like undefeated or 1 loss to really go out of your way to trade for them a month in advance, but they need to be on the radar. J.K. Dobbins on the bye. We'll see if he can have a DeAndre Swift type integration into this offense after the bye and kind of the news of the Mark Ingram injury. There's a real chance he could. It's not guaranteed, but I think that Dobbins if he's a guy I can get basically as like a throw in and his owner just doesn't value him as that much at this point. I think he's a sneaky guy.
That's the one thing I'm disagreeing with so far. I actually think people, because of Ingram's injury, are going to try to sell high on Dobbins. But I just don't get taken by that backfield. That's another backfield where it's not sexy or appealing to me. Lamar Jackson is the backfield that's sexy and appealing.
It's a headache. I think it's a stat. Like, dude, I'm not going out of my way for Dobbins, but if I do a deal where I'm getting multiple players in return and somehow Dobbins is just like the throw in to put him over the top and I can stash him at the bottom on bench, I'm fine with it. I agree. It just depends, I think, on how sharp the players are in your league, how much they're paying attention to it, on, what they think about Dobbins at this point. Both Bucks wide receivers, Yasin, we talked about it last week, like absolutely go after Chris Godwin. Mike Evans, I think, is in play with the down week last week. People concerned about his volume with Godwin back in the picture, a little bit injured. He was living completely on the touchdowns the weeks before that. If I can cash in on either Bucks wide receiver at this point on a cheap deal, like that's a smart move. We've had the window reopen on Michael Thomas now with the hamstring injury. It sounds like it's very up in the air whether he's going to play this week or not. And certainly there's got to be Michael Thomas owners out there struggling, Yasin, that it's going to be difficult for them to absorb another lost week. You're not going to rip them off, but if you can go put together like a DJ Moore and James Robinson to a team that needs plays this week, or even a Ronald Jones and, one of those guys, I think you do it if you can afford to pull that off. Then I think the last one is we talked about Terry McLaurin. I think he's a guy to watch here. And if anybody is for any reason concerned about DeAndre Hopkins, which I don't think they are, he's got a monster matchup this week. I don't think there's a buy low window on him, but if I could buy DeAndre Hopkins, he's got one of the best profiles you could ever imagine for mega upside down the stretch. Like, I'm in on Hopkins if there's any way to get him right now.
Yeah. Cool. All right. We're going to go rapid fire. We have a ton of questions. I want to try to catch up. So let's try to keep as many of these answers to one word as possible. This will be a challenge. But we're going to try to catch up on these questions that we have. Antonio Brown, Des Bryant. I'm guessing Antonio Brown's the pickup. Des Bryant is speculative. Are you pulling the trigger on trying to acquire either of them?
I picked up Brown this week. Yep. Not Des. I don't care about Des Bryant. He's washed.
Okay. Hasty or Moss, half point PPR.
I'd roll the dice on Hasty this week. They love him.
Okay. Let's see. Full PPR for the flex from Adam. Kenyon Drake, Brandon Cooks, or Mike Williams?
Like them all. I think you got to go with Drake.
Okay. This person needs to bench one. They can only play three. You're not benching Derrick Henry. You're not. I think who are you benching from here? Derrick Henry, Kareem Hunt, Connor, or Carson?
Well, I'm not benching Carson in an excellent matchup. Henry and Carson for sure, and I'm deciding between Hunt and Connor, probably based on PPR or not. We have Hunt basically one or two spots ahead of Connor, so I'd bench Connor.
That's really rough. That's a great problem to have. Tannehill.
First world problems.
Yeah, exactly. Tannehill or Herbert rest of season?
I'm in love with Herbert. I don't think I can recommend him over Tannehill, but I'm absolutely in love with Herbert. So Tannehill.
Okay. All right, let's take a look. We have people giving answers. Thank you. This person has a trade question. Trade Gurley and Galladay for Hopkins and PPR. This person would be replacing Gurley with Gibson. And they also have McLaurin.
Hell yeah. If you can afford to do it in your winning team, hell yeah. That's the exact type of move that a great owner makes to try to start to take this thing home down the stretch.
Agreed. All right, cool. PPR needs to start two. Let's start two. I'm assuming Allen Robinson, DJ Chark, or Gio. I don't know if it's DJ Chark. Might be David Johnson. Sorry, Justin. You're going to have to react. That's difficult.
I hope it's David Johnson and Gio. That's what we would go with. If it's DJ Chark, I'd probably go with Robinson and Gio.
Yeah. DeMarcus Robinson or J-Rob? I guess James Robinson.
Yeah.
All right.
Rob.
This week, take a look. Half PPR. Actually, we answered this earlier. Deontay Johnson or Gio, full point PPR. I think earlier we said Gio, and we're going to stick with that.
Yep.
Are we starting Bernard or Jacobs? I'm going Bernard because I am nervous about.
Yeah, I'm going Bernard. I'm actually going to have to make that adjustment to our rankings as soon as we get off this broadcast.
Okay. Let's take a look. David Johnson, David Montgomery, Swift and Singletary. Start two, sit two.
Probably Johnson and Montgomery.
Yeah, those are who I'm starting as well. So the first two. Gio or Drake? I believe we answered this earlier. And I
Gio
forgot
all
what your
day.
answer was.
Boy, your users are sure going to hate me if Gio puts up an Alexander Madison this week.
I mean, look, guys, this is fantasy, right? We talked about this earlier. We talk about this every week. We are talking about a range of possibilities. Those possibilities go from 0 to a maximum value of points. You cannot get upset if you made a decision that ended up being a poor fantasy output. What you can do is prepare and slot in the person that's expected in the majority of scenarios to outperform compared to your other options. That means you're going to be wrong sometimes. You can only prepare yourself to be ready for the scenarios, but some of those scenarios include the person severely outperforming the other option that ended up going off on your bench, and that's fantasy.
Well, and the concept behind that is that over the long run, you'll be right more than you're wrong if you make those type of decisions.
Exactly. Okay. Alex has a lengthy question that I'm going to skip until the end if we can get there. Let's go to Andrew. Edelman, Brandon Cooks, or Emmanuel Sanders, PPR?
Cooks.
I'm going Cooks as well. All right. Talked about Antonio Brown a little bit. Let's take a look. We talked about Antonio Brown or Des Bryant rest of season, and the answer was Antonio Brown, though. Let's take a look. Tio or Ocho Cinco?
Funny thing is, I might take T.O. over Des Bryant at this point.
Yeah, fair. Are we worried about Jonnu Smith?
Is there an injury update or something I missed on Jonnu Smith? I hate to say that right here on the broadcast, but I mean, Jonnu Smith has obviously been.
He was upgraded. He was upgraded on Thursday from his ankle injury.
Yeah, so anytime Jonnu Smith is upgraded, we feel good about that. He's a good player on the season.
So Austin Hooper was ruled out, as we discussed earlier. Are we starting the other Browns tight end over Hurst? And I assume they mean Njoku as the other Browns tight end.
I would not. Let's look at it. Well, it's a tough matchup for Hurst, but I would not, man. It's a 55-point game total in Atlanta on the fast track. Possible shootout with Detroit. I'm going to roll with Hurst. He's been pretty good on the season.
Okay, cool. Trade question. Hunter Henry for Philip Lindsay. Which side win?
I mean, both sides potentially win. I mean, if you need a tight end, I like getting Hunter Henry out of this deal. What are you going to do with? It's like you said, you got to think about this. What are you going to do with Philip? Are you even ever going to start Philip Lindsay? And if not, how good of depth is he? How good of depth is he even really on your bench? Like with Gordon coming back, I think it's a great time to try to sell on Philip Lindsay.
So look, here's the situation with Gordon. By the way, if his suspension comes out, I think so. There's a possibility he gets suspended this season. If it happens, and I think word on the street is that there will be probably a 3-game suspension at some point. These suspensions sometimes take time; they're not immediate. The suspension might come down next season. We don't have a great level of clarity on what's going to happen there. But I think there's a possibility it happens this season. There's a possibility it happens next season. Just do with that information what you will, but you should expect Melvin Gordon to miss a few games on suspension at some point.
By the way, the Gordon owner probably the one who pay up the most for Lindsay in your league.
Yeah, that's right. I like this question from Shane. They picked up Antonio Brown, but someone dropped Deontay Johnson. Do we drop Antonio Brown again to go with Deontay?
I probably would. That's close, but I mean, he's an active player in the league right now that was getting the targets early in the season. I would take my chances on Deontay. I mean, if AB comes back, it's going to be like they're talking about him coming. If he comes, I don't think there's a situation he comes back where he's just clearly going to get monster volume right off the bat.
Well, this person already has Mike Thomas, Adams, and Diggs, so this would be a speculative. Like they can wait it out. So I think I would actually stick to AB because you're pretty set on wide receivers. Would you agree?
Identify your needs, right? Like if you're looking for a stash instead of a guy that you might be able to play sometime soon, then that would be the correct answer.
Yeah. All right. Louis has a question. Pick 2, Gio, Swift, Drake, or DJ Moore. I think I'm sitting Swift.
Probably Gio and Drake are the safe guys there.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Let's take a look. What do we think about Tim Patrick non-PPR? So standard league, Tim Patrick. What are our thoughts?
Well, I want to see what the snap counts and the touches were this last week. So Tim Patrick, 8 targets, 101 yards, 92% snap count. Yeah, I think it's not a great matchup on paper, but if you have to roll with Tim Patrick this week, I think you could do worse. I mean, he's like probably a high-end wide receiver 4.
Cool. All right. See, Pedro has a question. They traded Kittle for Thomas. I guess, was it a good trade is the question. And then we'll answer the second part.
If they have a great backup tight end and they don't mind kind of taking some lumps on Thomas if he misses any more time, then it was a good trade. If you are screwed at tight end and now your roster is compromised this week because you don't have Thomas or Kittle and you're just like a middling team in the standings in your league, I'm not sure it was a great trade. Trading for injured players is tricky, man. You got to be careful. You got to be in the right position to do that.
Yeah, I just don't think that a top tier, like top 1 or 2 tight end is worth trading in many situations in general because that position is very thin in general.
And are we even sure that Michael Thomas is going to come back into this version of this Saints offense and be what he was last year? I'm not completely sold on that.
A ton of question marks there. All right. Drop Ingram to keep Gio, standard league. Are we dropping Ingram to keep Gio?
Yep.
Okay.
You said it earlier. Let's relinquish the headaches and the crappy situations, Yasin. It's liberating.
Yeah. All right. We already answered Hayden Hurst or Johnny. No, we didn't answer Hayden Hurst or Johnny Smith. Who are we going? Standard.
Well, I'm not sitting Jonnu Smith if he's healthy and he's playing. Let's see what the matchups are. Tennessee. It's a tougher matchup against Pittsburgh, but it's not an impossible matchup, dude. I'm going with Jonnu Smith. Okay.
Now, I think we already answered this earlier through another question. Kobe has a question about Gio or James Robinson in PPR. Let's assume this week. I think the answer is Gio because James Robinson just doesn't have a great game script, and he's been on the decline recent weeks, as you mentioned earlier. Is that right, Byron?
100%.
Okay, great. Matt has a question. PPR, better flex. They have Ruggs, but they could play Jamal Williams, Le'Veon Bell, or Jimmy Graham. I'm not touching this question. That's all you. There are too many question marks here for me, and you know my opinion on Jimmy Graham. I love the guy. I just, fantasy-wise, I just can't.
I actually really love that this person brought up Jamal Williams because we talked earlier in the broadcast about all the important handcuffs that are out there in the league, and that really came to the surface today with the Joe Mixon news and all this discussion about Gio Bernard. But at this point, Jamal Williams is probably the other guy that nobody talks about enough. Like, he's an important handcuff if you're an Aaron Jones owner. And in some ways, he doesn't have flex appeal. He's an important handcuff. 51% snap count, only 4 touches for Jamal Williams last week. I know it's like the number 1 matchup up of the week at Houston for fantasy running back, so I can see why we're thinking about Jamal Williams, but I think he needs to be treated more like an elite handcuff that should be owned rather than a flex you're going to play. Like, you would play him begrudgingly. So to me, I would play Ruggs or Jimmy Graham in this one. So it's a tough matchup, obviously, for Ruggs against that Tampa Bay secondary. It's one of the toughest matchups in the entire league. Obviously, Ruggs is a guy who might be able to get loose against him. And let's see what the matchup for Jimmy Graham is. I know you hate Jimmy Graham. It just seems like such a trashy. It's like, what are we even talking about? 2012 or something here. Middling matchup for Jimmy Graham. This is a tough spot. I probably would go with Ruggs.
I mean, the real nobody brings up a good point. No O-line, they'll throw all game long, and I think that's a fair thought there.
Good point. They should be playing from behind, and Gruden seems to, even though he's not getting massive volume when Ruggs is healthy, Gruden is attempting to scheme up some plays for that guy. So I think we've got to take our chances. All of those are thin options.
Yeah. All right. We have a question from Enrique. Who would you plug in this weekend against the tough Seattle run defense, Drake or Edmonds? This person says knowing that Drake ain't in the passing game, which makes me think this is PPR.
Yeah, I just based on volume and snap count, you've just got to go with Drake at this point. I know he's not really involved in the passing game, but this is a game that could have a lot of points, and I just think the lead guy is a safer option there.
Okay. Mike Williams or Montgomery, the running back. Full PPR.
Probably, I'd go Montgomery. It's just a safer option. Have you gotten any updates on Keenan Allen today, Yasin? I mean,
No,
I know they were still saying he's less than 100% at this point, which, that obviously works to Mike Williams' favor a little bit, but I think you got to go David Montgomery and just get the volume there.
Okay, yeah. He was limited in Wednesday's practice. I'm pretty sure he was upgraded. I can't remember off the top of my head with Keenan Allen, though. But I think he's going to be good to go, by the way.
And also, by the way, in PPR, Montgomery's been actually getting a lot of targets. So that I think that it makes the case even better. You're getting the guaranteed volume with Montgomery in a decent matchup, and he's getting the reception. So I think it's a safer option in PPR and offers probably similar upside.
Cool. All right, who to start in flex? Half PPR, Robbie Anderson, Justin Jackson, or Gio?
Gio.
Okay. Let's take a look. We have more questions. We're finally catching up, though. First time watching and just subscribed. Congratulations to us.
Right.
Cool. Robert has a question. Gio over Gibson, PPR.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep.
That's my guy, Robert Braswell from Rosterwatch, I think.
What's up, Robert?
Oh, good times.
All right, let's take a look. We have a lot of advice coming from the Real Nobody on the Fantasy Life app in the chat too, and Harmony, who I know from the app and on Twitter. So, by the way, Curtis Samuel officially questionable with his knee injury for the game on Sunday versus the Saints. That report just came out. I expect it to hit on the Fantasy Life app immediately. So, there it is. Curtis Samuel, questionable. We haven't talked about Carolina yet. Nobody's really asked questions outside of Robbie Anderson. So let's continue going down and find more questions here. I think this is a good question. Javier has a question. Thielen for McCaffrey. Are we trading away Thielen to get McCaffrey? Let's assume PPR. My answer is yes, because I love me a good running back.
Absolutely. I mean, Thielen's on a bye. So
yeah.
If McCaffrey's going to be back in a week, yes. There's no situation unless somehow that leaves you totally messed up at wide receiver and you're already stacked at running back. But even then, man, you find a way to get McCaffrey and figure that thing out on the back end.
Yeah, I think it's easier to make up for a wide receiver than it is to make up for a running back.
And Thielen, truly a statistical anomaly in terms of his production this year. Generally a profile you would say is totally unsustainable. I do think that he has a certain role in that offense that's making him viable this year. But yeah, I mean, that's a great deal if you can. That's a winning, that's an aggressive winning trade. Go big or go home.
Yep, agreed. DJ Chark or Claypool, half PPR for the flex spot.
Well, let's
you have Jacksonville going up against the Chargers, depleted Chargers defense. We have Claypool. They have a good game this week. I'm looking forward to that game. They're going up against the Titans.
We got Claypool a few spots ahead. I guess we could look at the injury report and see, are any of the principal defensive backs injured for Los Angeles this week? I don't believe they are. That would be the only situation where I would. Let me see here really quick.
I don't actually know.
Okay. Yeah, well, in that situation, I would go with Claypool.
Cool. All right, we have more questions coming in, but we are catching up finally. Let's take a look. Okay, more broad question, but let's try to keep the answer short. From Eric, what receiver could I target in a trade if I'm giving up J-Rob and Juju or Crowder in PPR?
J-Rob and Juju or Crowder. Like I said earlier, I would go after Chris Godwin or Mike Evans. Perhaps you could go after McLaurin, but I would focus on one of the Tampa Bay wide receivers.
Cool. Cup or Robinson?
I'd also go after Michael Thomas if it's possible. Cup or Robinson, I would start. Two tough matchups. I'd probably go with Robinson in this one, lead guy.
Okay. Higgins, Claypool, Amari. This might be additional context for earlier, so that's not a question. Are we trading Kamara for CEH, Godwin, and Mike Evans?
If I can start all of those players, and if I need more players to fill out a more competitive starting lineup because I'm struggling, like putting a crappy player in one or two spots every week, then yes, I would make that deal. But if I'm like a winning team that's undefeated and I've got tons of players, like these aren't going to always be starters for me, or it's going to push other good players to my bench, then and also when you make a trade like this, who do you have to drop? All those are considerations, but it's a fair trade. And if you need the players, it's a good trade, and I would do it.
Got it. All right, I'm going to, because we're almost caught up with the questions. We still have more to go. We'll try to get to those, but there's 13 minutes left before we have to really call it a day. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the good matchups this week. We have on the board Carolina Panthers against the Saints. What are your thoughts on the teams going into that matchup on Sunday?
Well, super interested to see the Teddy Bridgewater return there to New Orleans. Like that's obviously an interesting narrative to kind of
love storyline. Yep.
And I think that there's, my sentiment is probably this could be a sneaky, tricky matchup potentially for Bridgewater, even though it's like a great matchup on paper. It's the number 4 matchup of the week on paper for Teddy Bridgewater at New Orleans. And I guess, you know what? No crowd there in New Orleans. That makes it way less of a home field advantage. So maybe I need to back off of that stance. So I think you feel okay about Bridgewater if you've got to play him. Number 4 matchup, 51-point over-under. They are 7.5-point underdogs, the Panthers. So that obviously, Yasin, like we speak about regularly, projects for the passing game on the Carolina side to be the predominant factor for them, which is good for Anderson, good for Moore. We saw that Moore reclaimed the target share last week. Will be interesting to see how that shakes out. And then, the other side, it's a kind of a tough matchup for Drew Brees, and the Panthers defense has been tougher really than anybody expected, so far this year, but it's an awesome matchup for Alvin Kamara, the number 2 matchup of the week, and potentially for Latavius Murray as like an emergency flex situation in that matter, a team, in a game where the Saints are favored by 7.5 points. So look, if there's no Michael Thomas, you can always look at Traquan Smith and Emmanuel Sanders. Both of those have been serviceable in his absence. Sanders has really emerged in recent weeks. And then it's not a great matchup on paper for Jared Cook, but again, like I think he's a solid back end tight end 1 if you need a guy in this matchup.
Got it. Really quick question here: Dalton Schultz or Darren Fells?
Probably Schultz. I mean, a little bit worried, obviously, about what we saw of the Cowboys offense last week, but Schultz actually was one of the guys that still got some looks out there. So I think I would plug away with Schultz, one more time here. Let's look at the matchups. It's the top number 6 matchup of the week for fantasy tight ends for Schultz. And then if we look at Fells, what was that? Houston. That was going to be Houston. It's a tougher matchup. So yeah, go with Schultz.
All right.
Look at this testimonial, Yasin.
Yeah, I do that up there really quick. So this is a weird one. Aaron Jones is not practicing. AJ Brown returned to practice, but Aaron Jones is not practicing. No idea why. And you just talked about Jamal Williams being an important backup here. Let me take a look at what we just sent out about Aaron Jones.
I mean, if Jones.
Yeah. So all right. So Aaron Jones not present at practice. He'll be on the injury report. He'll still talk to reporters in a bit. That's good news, by the way. That means at a minimum it's not a concussion. But he's not practicing, and you did just talk about the importance of Jamal Williams. Now, Green Bay is playing Houston this week. Should be a 1 o'clock Eastern time kickoff. What are we doing if Aaron Jones, for some bizarre reason, does not play?
Well, you are starting Jamal Williams in an excellent spot. I mean, probably start to feel similar about him the way that we feel about Gio, which is possibly a pretty good RB2 this week. I mean, if you look at that matchup, it is the number one matchup of all of fantasy for running backs. Green Bay at Houston. Yeah, you're over the moon to start Jamal Williams as like a total just godsend this week out of nowhere. If this development occurs and you happen to own Williams or are able to run to your wire and pick him up. And then once again, this highlights, Yasin, that if you're an Aaron Jones owner, Jamal Williams doesn't get discussed enough as one of the most important premier handcuffs in fantasy, and he needs to be in that conversation.
Are you done talking about Jamal Williams yet? Because if you are, I can finally say
I got 10 more minutes for you, dude. Jamal.
I can finally say about Jamal Williams, I dropped him this morning. I don't even remember who I picked up. In a league where I really didn't need him, but Aaron Jones is not practicing for some unknown reason, and that's
folks. This is called cognitive dissonance. You're witnessing it right here live on the broadcast. Yasin going through the stages of grief right here on air.
You mentioned Jamal Williams earlier, and I knew this was the case, and I knew I'd already dropped him in a league where it could have been great, but I had another option. And it made sense to drop him. And then you find out Aaron Jones isn't practicing. You're over here talking him up as the most important handcuff. Luckily, I don't roster Aaron Jones. But if you could please stop talking up Jamal Williams and his importance, that'd make me personally feel quite better instead of quite bitter, which I am at the moment. Let's move over. Let's jump over to let's go to the New York teams. Buffalo versus New York Jets. It's not a sexy matchup because it involves the Jets. It's a sexy matchup because it involves the Bills. Bills have not had a great past few games, but they are still the Bills, and they still have Josh Allen. They still have great wide receiver targets, and they are going up against the Jets. And the Jets, they house the number one person in terms of targets per game in Jamison Crowder, regardless of who's under center, as you mentioned earlier. What do you have lined up for this game? What's the over-under, or what's the point total expected here? Tell me about Bills versus Jets.
Buffalo Bills and New York Jets. The Bills are 12-point favorites, 45-point expected game total. Surprises me a little bit because the matchups really are pretty good for the Bills players. It's a middling matchup for Josh Allen, but one that he should be able to, resurrect his production in. And then, it's a good matchup for all the skill players on the Buffalo side. When you see that, oftentimes that points directly back to the quarterback. So it's not expected to be a big bonanza of points, but Josh Allen can certainly turn things into a bit of a fantasy bonanza. We've got him as our number 5 quarterback of the week over at Rosterwatch. So if you've got Josh Allen, you're playing him and you feel pretty good that you're going to get a rebound here. Stephon Diggs, another guy. We've talked about players with great profiles as fantasy wide receivers. Hopkins, Fuller to an extent. Stephon Diggs, another one of those guys that when you look at all the underlying metrics is just an awesome own right now. John Brown missed another day of practice. So if you've got Diggs, you feel really, really good about that one. And then on the Jets side of the ball, I don't know how you start anybody other than Crowder. I think everybody's taking a long look at LaMichael Pirine right now, the rookie running back out of Florida that we scouted at the Senior Bowl. But, still last week for Pirine, it was a 58% snap count, 9 touches, 36 yards. He did lead the backfield in snap count. So, that's one to monitor. I'm not sure we're ready to start him yet, but that's certainly one to monitor. I guess if you're desperate in a deep league, you could put him in a desperation flex situation. Okay.
So this is a telling comment. What's Aaron Jones' situation? Guys, the Aaron Jones situation is unclear, actually. If he plays, I think he's in for a huge game. However, his status right now is unknown. The official practice report has not come out. So all we know is he's not practicing. That is the portion open to the media. which means there is still a full practice that will happen, but none of the reporters know what's happening yet. They haven't announced anything. It's a new injury, if it is an injury. Guys, it could be as easy as it's a personal day or something was going on at home. It could also be he was sitting inside and, I don't know, he was talking to somebody inside or was in the locker room late. So all of these things are possibilities until the official injury report comes out. We don't know what's going on with Aaron Jones. It could be nothing. But if he's playing, I'm expecting a big game. Are you?
I mean, I'm currently adding Jamal Williams in my most important season-long league right now as we're talking. I just dropped my kicker for him. Folks, remember, if you're never sure, like, drop your kicker. Pick up a guy, hold him until you can get some more information and make a decision. Yeah, so, I mean, that's a big time. That's the number one matchup of the week for fantasy running backs.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump over to let's go NFC East. This is the ugliest thing I've seen in a long time. Let's talk Washington and Dallas.
Oh man,
talk to me about Washington and Dallas. These are the ugly matchup here. Good for not many people, but there are some potential fantasy nuggets here that I'd like to talk about.
Here's the thing: is that as bad as these teams look, the NFC East just has the longest history of these games surprisingly having a lot of points when you don't expect it, because honestly, it's been kind of a crappy division for a while. And when the Giants and the Eagles and the Cowboys and they all get together, and oftentimes there's some outbreaks. So as bad as the teams are, it's a 46-point game total coming off the sports book, which is, it's kind of a middling. Actually, the Redskins. I mean, the Washington football team. Excuse me, Washington football team. Sorry, I've been watching football since I was 5 years old. I'm trying to retrain my brain on this one. The Washington football team, 1-point favorites at home. We've said it. This is a bounce back spot for McLaurin. It's, I think, a potentially sneaky bounce back spot for Antonio Gibson if you have to roll him out. Logan Thomas, you start begrudgingly if you're in a horrible tight end situation, but he got the touchdown last week. I think the quarterback situation stabilizes a little bit as long as we have Kyle Allen in there. And then, I mean, the other side of the ball, you've got real concern. Like, we know Zeke is supposedly going to get more volume under, in the post Dak Prescott injury situation, but that offensive line is really, really bad. I think you start treating Zeke more as like a top 5 to 10 running back than maybe like a top 3 running back that we were thinking of him. I mean, clearly he's still going to be a player you start. And then we said it, you could start Schultz, and you can start Lamb and Cooper if you need to, but again, we saw that begin to erode. Amari Cooper, one of the most inefficient wide receivers on the season. He kind of saved his bacon a little bit with the touchdown last week. He's still got the volume. But just being tied to Andy Dalton, you have some real concerns there on a week-to-week basis. Is like, what percentage of, Amari Cooper from earlier in the season you're going to get? And then, we saw Lamb get the targets. The yardage came down. It was still a decent PPR game, but I mean, I think it's unlikely he's going to be a player that you had become accustomed to before Dak went down. So, CeeDee Lamb, probably a wide receiver 3. Dalton Schultz, probably like a low-end tight end 1 at this point. Amari Cooper, he's been a wide receiver 2 on the season. I think you treat him probably that way, maybe a low-end wide receiver 2 this week. And then Andy Dalton, you would prefer not to play him unless you really have no other options.
Cool. All right, let's talk. We don't have much time. We're at 1:29 Eastern time. I know you got a jet at 1:30. So why don't I actually hand it off to you? Is there a nugget that you want to talk about? Anything, anywhere, anybody that you think it would be a disservice to anybody that's listening to not know this week?
Well, I think that we should look at the teams here with the highest projected game totals on the week. I mean, this is the first place that I go, especially when I'm putting my DFS lineups together every single week. Yasin, is maybe a little PSA here is, you want to go look for the games that are projected to be shootouts, game totals projected by the sports book. You want to look for the players that are going to have the good matchups. And then you kind of want to organize that by the correlations. And I've been having a lot of success in the Millionaire Maker in recent weeks over on DraftKings, using that system, really kind of parsing things out by the correlations and trying to build, logical DFS constructions based around that. So it's a good place to start with the games that are projected to be a shootout. Figure out what the correlations are and who the players are with the good matchups. And I think that's a good first step to a lot of the listeners becoming more successful in their DFS lineups.
Cool. All right, great. Guys, thanks again for tuning in. We are going to jet, but this is always a pleasure to have you guys join us. Thank you. We tried to answer as many questions as possible, and we'll have this up on YouTube, but I think on Facebook, on our Facebook page with Fantasy Life, it should already be up. So let us know what you think. Please like us, subscribe I forgot to do, I've never done this before. So subscribe. I think that's an important thing to do on YouTube for us, right? So do that. Check out Rosterwatch. Like I said, Byron is the guy that actually goes to training camps and knows these players and is very well respected in the industry for the level of analysis that they provide and how well they know these players. And then you guys know the Fantasy Life app. We are incredible when it comes to alerts. I'm very proud of the alerts that we send out. And we essentially do that so that we can give you guys an edge in fantasy and really arbitrage against sports books, which I'm super excited that people do that with. All right, guys. Byron, anything else before we sign off?
Oh, no, man. I had a great time, and thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again for everybody who was answering questions as well. Take care, everybody.